Louisiana, a city of stars, sun, and staggering inequality. Did you know that Los Angeles County has over 75,000 homeless individuals, making it the largest unsheltered population in the U.S.? But why does this crisis persist in one of the world's wealthiest cities? Today, we're unpacking the numbers, the root causes, and the solutions. Make sure you subscribe. This isn't just LA's problem. It's a wake-up call for America. Homelessness in Los Angeles is a very severe matter, which is often overlooked. Over 75,000 individuals are homeless in Los Angeles, which represents a 9% increase from 2022 and means that 1 in 150 Angelenos lack stable housing. 70% of the homeless population in Los Angeles is unsheltered, sleeping in cars, tents, or on sidewalks. This rate is significantly higher than New York City, 5%, and Chicago, 40%. Black residents make up 9% of Los Angeles's population, but account for 34% of the homeless population. 14% of Los Angeles residents live below the poverty line. For many, rent consumes 60 to 80% of their income. How did a city synonymous with opportunity become a symbol of American inequality? Let's find out in this documentary presented by Discoverize. What has pushed LA to this state of poverty and homelessness? Here's an easy-to-understand breakdown of how skyrocketing housing costs fuel LA's homelessness crisis. Imagine working full-time but still struggling to afford a tiny apartment. That's the reality for thousands in Los Angeles, where housing costs have exploded into a full-blown crisis. Let's start with the basics. The average price of a home in LA is around $900,000, yes, nearly $1 million. To put that in perspective, that's twice the national average. Even a modest one-bedroom apartment now costs over $2,500 a month to rent, which is up 65% since 2010. But here's the kicker. Wages haven't come close to keeping up. While rents soared, paychecks for most workers stayed flat, leaving many stuck in a financial trap. So why are prices so high? A big part of the problem is simple supply and demand. LA has way more people who need homes than there are homes available. Fancy high-rises and luxury condos keep getting built, but affordable units? Not so much. Developers often focus on expensive properties because they make more money that way. Meanwhile, middle-class and low-income families get squeezed out. Think of it like a game of musical chairs, except half the chairs are reserved for the wealthy, and everyone else is fighting over what's left. But it's not just about buildings. Investors and corporations buying up homes to rent or flip have made things worse. Ever heard of a hedge fund landlord? Wall Street firms now own thousands of LA homes, turning them into pricey rentals or letting them sit empty as investments. This drives up prices for everyone else. Combine that with foreign investors parking money in LA real estate, and regular folks get pushed to the sidelines. For working-class Angelenos like teachers, nurses, or restaurant workers, this means impossible choices. Many spend 60 to 80% of their income just on rent, leaving little for food, healthcare, or emergencies. One unexpected bill, a car repair, a medical issue can spiral into eviction. Even people with steady jobs end up sleeping in cars or couch surfing. Others move hours away to cheaper areas, enduring grueling commutes just to keep a roof over their heads. This isn't just a housing problem, it's a domino effect. When rents swallow most of your paycheck, saving for the future feels like a fantasy. Young people delay starting families. Seniors on fixed incomes get priced out of neighborhoods they've lived in for decades. And for those already on the edge, like gig workers with unstable incomes or folks recovering from addiction, the risk of falling into homelessness becomes terrifyingly real. In short, LA's housing market isn't broken, it's rigged. Until the city builds enough truly affordable homes and reins in corporate greed, the crisis will keep growing. After all, how can a city thrive when even its hardest workers can't afford to live there? Lack of affordable housing. Picture a city where there are 100 families desperately needing affordable apartments, but only 15 units exist. That's essentially Los Angeles right now. The city is short 500,000 homes that low-income residents can actually afford: teachers, grocery workers, janitors, retirees. These aren't people asking for luxury. They just need a basic, safe place to live without spending their entire paycheck on rent. But here's the problem. Most new construction isn't for them. Developers often build high-end apartments or sleek condos because they make more money that way. It's like opening a shoe store that only sells fancy high heels, even though half the customers just need sneakers. Why doesn't LA just build more affordable housing? It's not that simple. Building affordable units costs money, and government funding for these projects is limited. Plus, outdated rules about where apartments can be built make it worse. For example, many neighborhoods only allow single-family homes, like houses with yards, blocking apartment buildings that could house dozens of families. Imagine a family of 4 crammed into a studio apartment because nothing bigger exists, or a senior citizen forced to live in a garage because their fixed income can't cover rent. These aren't rare stories. They're everyday life for thousands. Even when affordable housing does get built, it takes years. Red tape, lawsuits from neighbors who don't want those people nearby, and rising construction costs drag out the process. A project approved today might not open until 2030. Meanwhile, rents keep climbing, pushing more people toward homelessness. Think of it like trying to fill a bathtub with a thimble while the drain is wide open. This shortage doesn't just hurt individuals, it destabilizes the whole city. When workers can't afford to live near their jobs, they commute for hours, clogging freeways and polluting the air. Kids switch schools constantly because their families keep getting priced out of neighborhoods, and the cycle continues. Without stable housing, it's nearly impossible to find a job, stay healthy, or care for your family. Fixing this isn't just about building, it's about giving people a fighting chance to survive, let alone thrive. Systematic failures. Imagine a safety net full of holes. That's what happens when mental health care and addiction treatment systems fail. About 30% of LA's homeless population live with illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or severe depression. Many were once stable but fell through the cracks when they couldn't afford therapy, medication, or a bed in a treatment center. Others self-medicate with drugs or alcohol to cope with trauma or street life, which can spiral into addiction, impacting 1 in 4 homeless individuals. But here's the kicker. LA has far fewer rehab beds, counselors, and crisis centers than it needs. It's like having a car that's breaking down but no mechanics around to fix it. Without help, people get trapped in a cycle where homelessness worsens their health, and their health makes it impossible to escape homelessness. Then there's the policy side. For decades, governments have slashed funding for social service, like cutting the number of shelter beds or shutting down public mental health clinics. Think of it as dismantling a ladder while telling people to climb out of a pit. At the same time, zoning laws rules about what can be built where often block affordable apartments from being constructed in neighborhoods with jobs and schools. Wealthy areas might ban apartment buildings to keep their character, pushing low-income families into overcrowded slums or the streets. These policies aren't accidents. They're choices that prioritize profits over people. Together, these failures create a perfect storm. Someone loses their job, can't afford rent, and ends up in a tent. Their untreated anxiety worsens. They start using drugs to numb the pain. Shelters are full. Rehab has a 6-month wait list, and the only help available is a jail cell or an ER visit. It's a system that punishes people for being poor instead of giving them the tools to heal. Fixing this means investing in care, not cops, and rewriting rules that keep affordable housing and hope out of reach. Economic volatility. Think of working in the gig economy like driving for Uber, delivering food, or freelancing as walking a tightrope without a safety net. These jobs might offer flexibility, but they come with big risks. No health insurance, no paid sick days, and no guarantee you'll earn enough each month. One week you might make good money. The next, your car breaks down or the app's algorithm cuts your hours. There's no cushion for emergencies. Now imagine you're living in LA, where rent alone can eat up most of your paycheck. A single setback, like a hospital visit for a broken arm or a bad flu, can cost thousands you don't have. Without insurance, that bill could force you to choose: pay rent or pay the doctor. For many, this instability snowballs. If you skip rent to cover a medical bill, you risk eviction. This isn't just bad luck, it's baked into the system. Gig companies treat workers as independent contractors, which means they don't have to provide benefits like traditional employers. Politicians talk about the freedom of gig work, but for thousands of Angelenos, it's a trap. When your income fluctuates wildly and there's no backup plan, even a small crisis can shatter your life. Fixing this means creating real safety nets like universal healthcare, guaranteed sick pay, and rules that force gig companies to treat workers fairly, because no one should lose their home just for getting sick. The impact: city under strain. Here's a clear, relatable explanation of how LA's homelessness crisis affects everyone in the city. Los Angeles spends over $1 billion every year trying to manage homelessness, but that money isn't fixing the problem. It's just keeping it from exploding. Think of it like putting a bucket under a leaky roof instead of repairing the roof. Most of that cash goes to emergency rooms, treating people who sleep on the streets, police responding to 911 calls about encampments, and crews cleaning up trash or needles. That's money that could go to schools, parks, or fixing potholes, but instead, it's spent on crisis care. The health risks ripple far beyond homeless communities. When hundreds of people live on sidewalks without bathrooms or clean water, diseases spread faster. For example, hepatitis A outbreaks, a deadly liver infection, have hit LA because there's nowhere to wash hands. During COVID-19, crowded shelters became hotspots, putting everyone at risk. Hospitals are overwhelmed too. ERs fill up with homeless patients needing care for frostbite, infections, or overdoses, making wait times longer for everyone. Neighborhoods feel the strain too. Small businesses suffer when customers avoid areas with encampments. Parents worry about kids walking past tents or syringes on their way to school. Residents argue over solutions. Why can't the city do something? Some want shelters built. Others protest, fearing it'll lower property values. It's a lose-lose situation that pits neighbors against each other instead of uniting them to demand real change. But behind the debates are real people. A mom working 2 jobs who lost her apartment after a rent hike. A veteran with PTSD who can't navigate the maze of paperwork to get help. A grandma on a fixed income, evicted because her building was sold to a luxury condo developer. These aren't lazy or dangerous people, they're victims of a system that's forgotten how to take care of its own. The crisis isn't just hurting those without homes, it's tearing at the fabric of the entire city. Until LA addresses the root causes, everyone pays the price. The solutions: what's working and what's not. Here's a simple conversational breakdown of what's helping, what's missing in LA's fight against homelessness. Housing first is like giving someone a key to their own apartment before demanding they quit drugs or find a job. It sounds backwards, but it works. LA's Step Up program found that 88% of people stayed off the streets when given a stable home plus support like counseling and healthcare. Imagine trying to recover from addiction while sleeping in an alley. It's nearly impossible. But with a roof overhead, people can finally breathe and rebuild. Meanwhile, creative fixes are popping up. Tiny home villages, think cozy. Private cabins with shared kitchens and bathrooms offer dignity and safety faster than traditional shelters. Old motels are being turned into temporary housing, giving families a safe place to stay while they wait for permanent homes. And programs like $1,000 month cash payments, no strings attached, let people decide what they need most, whether it's rent, groceries, or fixing their car to keep their job. These aren't perfect, but they're lifelines. Then there's Mayor Bass's Inside Safe initiative, which moved over 21,000 people from tents into motels and shelters. That's huge, right? But critics say it's like shuffling folks from one temporary bed to another without solving the core issue. There's nowhere affordable to go next. Many end up back on the streets because LA still lacks enough permanent housing. It's a band-aid when the city needs surgery. The good news? We know it works. Cities like Houston reduced homelessness by 63% by focusing on housing-first policies and collaboration. LA has the tools: tiny homes, motel conversions, cash aid, but it needs to scale them fast and cut the red tape that slows construction. Most importantly, it needs to treat homelessness as a solvable crisis, not a fact of life. After all, if we can build stadiums and billion-dollar highways, why can't we build homes for teachers, veterans, and kids? Los Angeles isn't just a city of red carpets and palm trees, it's a mirror for America. The same forces driving people onto LA's streets: high rents, broken safety nets, and ignored mental health crises are playing out in cities nationwide. But here's the truth: homelessness isn't inevitable. We've seen what works. Tiny homes give people dignity. Cash aid keeps families afloat. Housing-first policies save lives. The problem isn't a lack of solutions, it's a lack of urgency. From Venice Beach's boardwalks to Skid Row's tents, this crisis tests our values. Do we accept encampments as normal in a country of plenty? Or do we demand better, not just band-aids, but real fixes like affordable housing and healthcare for all? Change won't come from politicians alone. It'll come from voters refusing to look away, neighbors supporting shelters in their backyards, and ordinary people holding leaders accountable. So stay informed, stay angry, and remember, behind every statistic is a human being, a parent, a veteran, a teen aging out of foster care who deserves more than a sidewalk to sleep on. Share their stories, fight for their futures, and yes, subscribe, because awareness is the first step toward action. LA's story doesn't have to end in despair. Together, we can turn compassion into real change.